Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning, depending on when you're watching this. Thanks for joining me again to discuss local history. Again, appreciate all the feedback I'm getting. I am sharing this to more pages, so I'm getting more feedback, which is great. And I'm also, some of you have asked about other avenues or other outlets to put the videos, and I'm working on YouTube. I'm working on a YouTube channel that all these videos would be available on, because some of you had said either Facebook, and I've noticed Facebook is being very difficult in some respects. Some videos end up going missing or hidden, or some of you just don't have the ability to access Facebook, and that YouTube would be easier and it would be a better archive of the discussions that we're having as well. So I'm working on that. So thanks for that suggestion. Hopefully in the next week or two I'll have the videos ready to roll on YouTube as well. This week's topic comes from some feedback I've received. As many of you know, I do a monthly newspaper column for the Easter Advertiser. I'm also working on, I've realized I have a lot of columns that I've written over the years, actually almost 200 columns about local history, and I am working on putting them into a series of books. So that's what I've been doing, and hopefully I'll have more news about that soon. But thanks to the Easter Advertiser for giving me an outlet monthly to share local history. And the topic this month, in case you missed it, and I put in the comments if you're watching on Facebook, the link to this month's column if you'd like to read it in more detail. But it's about this tradition that we used to have in East Aurora and in many communities of shops closing on Wednesdays, either all day Wednesday or Wednesday afternoons. And this topic came about because I was looking back in newspapers. What I tend to do is look back in the Easter Advertiser every once in a while, 50 years ago and 100 years ago, just to get some ideas. Anniversaries are important and often lead to a discussion of a topic. Something happened 100 years ago, something happened 50 years ago. So out of routine, one of my routines is to look back in the newspapers 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And while looking back 100 years ago, I noticed in August of 1923, there was an advertisement in the Easter Advertiser from the meat markets in town. And it is hard to believe that our village had multiple meat markets, more than a half dozen meat markets actually. Before the supermarkets came along that had meat departments in them, you had separate delicatessens, meat markets. You wouldn't go to one store for all your grocery shopping needs. So the meat markets got together and they had an ad that said that all the meat markets will be closing on Wednesdays at noon. And this piqued my interest, and I did know about this in the back of my head. I had heard stories and from folks that are a generation older than me, it seems. That was when this happened, was that stores throughout the village were closed on Wednesdays, sometimes just in the summer, sometimes just Wednesday afternoons. And so this piqued my interest, so I did a lot more research into it to try to figure out when and how and all the details about how this Wednesday closing of stores started. And as I was talking to people about it, some folks were like, I always wondered why stores were closed on Wednesday. Well, it seems to be that it was an informal tradition. And it had been going on for quite some time, especially in the South. It was very popular, but small communities would take a half holiday at least on Wednesday, because stores and shops would be open on Saturdays, which was a busy day for shopping. They would pick another day of the week to have a second day off, or at least a second afternoon off. And it became Wednesday out of an informal tradition. There are many theories. If you Google, and you're more than welcome, I encourage you to do that, as to why Wednesday was picked. Some say that it was the big market day. Others say that it was because churches had meetings on Wednesdays, and so they would have a half day off on Wednesday so people could go to the church meetings. there really isn't an agreement as to why Wednesday was chosen. But it could possibly just be that Wednesday is, we like to call it hump day today, but it just happens to be in the middle of the week, and it was a good day to have a second day off halfway through the week. So it could be, nothing more. It could be as simple as that as the reason as to why Wednesday was chosen. But it seems like I can't find any time before 1923 where there was a formal procedure, a formal cooperation to get the half day on Wednesday. So that was the first ad. Later on, other stores started to join in, but by the 1930s, it became quickly apparent that the only way these half holidays would work, or and even just if it's just in the summer months, was that if everybody did it. One of the reasons that the meat markets cooperated was because they wanted to have a fair shake when it came to the competition. If one store was open and another one was closed, it really wasn't fair to the closed one that they're taking the half holiday and the other one wasn't. More importantly, though, I think it was just to make sure customers were happy. Nothing more frustrating than going to Main Street of your small town, East Aurora, and remember this wasn't just an East Aurora thing, but nothing more frustrating than going to go shopping. Mostly housewives at the time would go to the meat markets to buy their meat, the grocery stores to buy their other groceries, go to the bank to make a deposit, and to go and find one open and another closed. And you couldn't do all your shopping in one day. It would get really frustrating. That was probably more the impetus to it. Another thing that happened was that the labor laws started to change in favor of employees. So they had limited the number of hours grocery workers could work to begin with. Then finally, incrementally, more restrictions were put on grocery workers and other workers. And then the 40-hour work week came along. And that's when banks joined in, and they decided that they were going to close on Wednesdays afternoons because they were going to all open on Saturday mornings for the convenience of customers. And they had to make up that time, unless they had a big staff, they had to make up that time. And so the banks throughout Niagara and Erie County, which I found interesting, cooperated in order to first not disadvantage one over another, and also for the customers, so they would know that all banks are closed on Wednesday afternoons but open on Saturdays. Now, the problem came when certain stores would not cooperate. Actually, surprisingly, the three of the small groceries in East Aurora, including one you might all remember, Hub's Park Grocery next to Hamlin Park, they always opened on Wednesdays, according to the newspaper. So, but the reason they could do that was because they were owner-operated. So a lot of times the owners of a business would close Wednesday afternoon because they wanted time off. And they didn't have employees, so if they were open on Saturdays, they would close another day of the week just so they could get their stuff done, their personal lives done, get their errands done. If they were owner-operated and they had no employees, the Hubs, for instance, it was Mr. and Mrs. Hubs. They did have a few employees, but it was mostly them. But on the other side of that argument was that, yes, maybe they wanted to, they would take, there was no one else to fill in for them, so they would take a second day off. But also, they didn't have to follow any labor laws. If you were a proprietorship and you were essentially exempt from the rules, you could open on Wednesday afternoons, work more than 40 hours a week. You weren't technically a grocery worker, you were the owner of the store, so you could do that. So some of these small groceries would do that. So then you had the stores like the A&P, the Red and White. Some of those names might be familiar to you. They were small groceries, but they were chain groceries. They were not owner operated. They'd have a manager who fell under the labor laws, and they'd have employees that would fall under the labor laws. So there was a back and forth in the 1930s of whether or not the grocery stores would follow the Wednesday afternoon closing, and it wasn't a rule; it was just a convenience thing. The Board of Trade, which was an organization in town similar to the Chamber of Commerce today, made several attempts. Through my research, I found this, several attempts to get everyone to cooperate, not just meat markets, not just grocery stores, but barbershops, everybody in town, to essentially close East Aurora village businesses, except for the essential ones, on Wednesday afternoon. So everybody was in the same boat. Unfortunately, if you had one barbershop that opened, one grocery store that opened, it ruined the whole cooperative effort, because that grocery store would have or barbershop would have a unfair, many would say, advantage over the others that had agreed to close. So it kept going back and forth, and actually the larger grocery stores, now this is before supermarkets, remember, so the larger grocery stores, your A&Ps, your Red and Whites, they had agreed to open. They had all said that they tried to close, but then again, the smaller groceries were not agreeing to close with them on Wednesday afternoon, so then they opened. Well, then the laws changed, and that limited the number of hours that the grocery workers could work. So then they, within a year, backtracked again. So it just was this flip-flop back and forth. And actually, the advertiser pointed out in a great editorial that I've quoted in the article that I wrote, that, they kept saying, we've been through this before, we keep discussing this every few years, and we just can't seem to make a decision about this Wednesday afternoon thing. And the only people that are really suffering are the consumers, because the shoppers who are going up to Main Street, not remembering that it's Wednesday afternoon, and if it wasn't a universal tradition, that it wouldn't be in their minds, they would forget that it's Wednesday, go up there, either find that the meat market they wanted to shop at was closed and they hadn't prepared on Tuesday, or they thought it was closed and then found out on Thursday that they could have gone up to the meat market. It just caused a ton of confusion. But I can't find a place where, a time where everything worked out. It just constantly was a problem. However, many of us who are around today remember a time when stores and shops, beauty parlors, I had a friend who told me after reading the article, he said, "Oh, I always wondered why the beauty parlor was closed on Wednesday." And it had just become a tradition, even into the 70s and 1980s. Many owner-operated, especially stores in East Aurora and in other communities, would still close on Wednesday afternoons. Sometimes just in the summer, but many times year-round. Sometimes they closed all day. And it was the second weekend day, because if the beauty parlor was open on a Saturday or a bank was open on a Saturday, they would close on Wednesday. And that tradition just tended to continue. We've gotten away from the Wednesday half holiday. You don't need me to tell you that, to look around and see that. The advent of the supermarket, the 24-hour shopping, it really changed how we... just two-income households was a big part of it. You don't have you have people picking up meals after either after work or not preparing meals every day. They're buying. We all do this. We buy groceries maybe once a week, even once every other week, and keep it for the whole week. That wasn't the pattern back 100 years ago, 1920s, 1930s. You would go daily to get what you needed for that evening's dinner, and so that was just the way it worked. And then as we got into two household incomes, able to freeze and refrigerate our groceries at home, that was a big change. So we didn't need to buy things every day. So a lot of lifestyle changes changed this whole Wednesday afternoon closing, and stores felt the pressure to open every day, and hiring employees and things like that. So, and we don't have mom and pop grocery stores anymore. And we still have some barbershops and lots of owner-operated businesses. I did notice that they do close. I kind of looked around online just to kind of, as I was researching this article, to see what stores do today. Your mom and pops, so to speak, your owner-operated stores. They do take days off, mostly probably because of economics, and they tend to be different days, not Wednesday. They tend to be Mondays and Tuesdays that I've noticed. That's probably more economic. We rely a lot on weekends. People are in town. We're open Sundays when they weren't open on Sundays 100 years ago. People are more mobile. We get a lot of people from out of town who come into East Aurora to shop on weekends. And a lot of us, because of two-income households and our lifestyle change, we do a lot more of this sort of thing on weekends as well. And Monday, Tuesdays, the business is slower. And so those are the days they pick rather than the Wednesday. One of the holdovers that I was thinking about, if someone said to me, they said, oh, that whole, I always wondered why the beauty parlor was closed on Wednesday, is an opposite thing happened where some things were open on Wednesdays. And I always wondered why, until I did this research, why Wednesday was picked. For instance, the museums in East Aurora, the Aurora Historical Society museums, the historian's office was always open on Wednesday afternoons. We're now open Wednesdays and Thursdays, but Wednesday afternoons 1 to 4, and the museums in town were open. They used to be. Now it's mostly by appointment since COVID. And again, a lifestyle changes. But the museums used to be open Wednesday afternoons, and now it dawned on me after doing this research that that was because it was basically a second Saturday. Stores closed. It was an afternoon off for many people, and the cultural things and church meetings. You would notice in the newspaper people would be planning certain events for Wednesday afternoons. Museums would be open. More leisurely activities would be open and happening on Wednesday afternoons because the stores were closed. And it was being treated like a Saturday. So in addition to the fact people are remembering that stores and shops were closed on Wednesday, other things were open, and that tradition just kept carrying on. Up until a couple years ago, Wednesday was the day for Saturdays and Sundays, and Wednesdays seemed to be the day for kind of cultural things to happen. Meetings and your museums were open, and the historian's office for research. So it wasn't an accident that Wednesday. It wasn't just no one just picked that day out of the sky for the historian's office to be open and the museums to be open on Wednesday afternoons. It was because there was a day off for most people, and there was nothing else to do in town on a Wednesday afternoon because everything was closed. So again, I invite you to read the article. I put it in the comments if you're on Facebook, and I welcome your feedback about it, or if you remember something involving the Wednesday closure of shops, or if you happen to remember a controversy about it, or any memories you have about it, I'd love to hear about it. And again, thanks for joining me. Again, just a caveat here, these videos, I am the Town and Village Historian, but this project, along with a lot of my writing, is separate, so anything that I discuss here is not technically part of my job as the Town and Village Historian. Again, please pop any questions you have either in the comments or send me a private message, and I look forward to hearing from you and seeing you next week. Thanks a lot. Have a good one.